Hi, everybody. I'm here today with Yuval and Galia from Israel. Galia, Yuval, welcome today.
Thank you.
Before we even begin, can I just get a brief introduction of yourselves and the organization you work for called Team8?
So I'll start if it's okay, Galia. I know typically ladies first, but it's okay if I start. So my name is Yuval. I'm actually from Tel Aviv, and this is the first time I actually do a Zoom interview with Dubai or via Dubai, so you can explain later. My background is in engineering. I study bachelor and master in engineering and later business administration. And I think for the audience, I actually went through all of the different positions that I later managed. So I was an engineer, I was in business development, I was in marketing, I was in sales, I was a CEO, and then I started the first company. Started the first fintech company. It wasn't even known as a fintech. It was the first, I guess, cross-border payment company called Borderfree, which went public in 2014 and later sold to Pitney Bowes. At some point, the head of sales replaced me as CEO, and I started another company called Payoneer, and that's also a cross-border payout company. Uh, it's grew to like a pretty sizable and very proud of its size and success and customers and satisfaction. Um, and I guess for the most part, I was involved many times in the early chaotic stages of starting something which has some kind of a skeleton or idea and then transform it into a company. And those are the stages that are most tricky and it's kind of fluid. And every day you can have nothing and then you can have something and then you kind of, it's pretty kind of intensive roller coaster. So those are the stages I really like. And I followed many companies in that space. Few words about Team8 and the reason I joined it is Team8 basically tried to institutionalize the beginning of a company. And I think I strongly believe that there is a lot to be done in improving the probability of a company to be successful by doing the right thing at the beginning and finding the right entrepreneurs, even if they don't know how to raise money, but they know how to build a product and they can see where the market goes and have many other set skills, but they cannot live without a salary for a year or they cannot live with the uncertainty of that. And suddenly, if you break down the elements that you need to start a company, you break it down to, okay, let's talk about funding and let's talk about finding the right design partners and let's talk about the process and the R&D, and D, and you break it down, then I think over time that will be probably the right way to start a company anyways, regardless of Team8, and Team8 is probably a very good player in Israel to do it.
Excellent.
Right. So just to formalize that, essentially, Team8 is a company building platform where we introduced a unique model that combines unique capabilities and very experienced domain experts and company builders together with a company building process that, as Yuval said, really tries to de-risk company building. And a secret sauce that we have to this element is really the village of our strategic investors and our partners that have interest in the specific innovation that we're driving to the market and sits with us and helps us steer the innovation every step of the way to validate that we're in the right direction, starting from the opportunity space, the solution and the architecture, and of course the product market fit. Team8 has been around for several years and started off doing so in cyber and then expanded into data technologies. In the past month, we've actually introduced Team8 Fintech, which is taking the same model and the same principles to try to accelerate and introduce a new way to build companies in fintech. I'll also introduce myself. I'm Galia, lawyer by profession, started off my career as a commercial lawyer. Gradually realized that my passion is in business. And I was lucky enough to work for PayPal for about 6 years in different managerial roles, covering and managing the sub-Saharan African region. So I was in charge of 40 markets in that area, then also the Israeli markets, and most recently managed sales and market development for Eastern Europe. So a lot of what I did through my tenure at PayPal was really product innovation and finding ways to increase the addressable market for PayPal. So very passionate about emerging markets and about driving financial wellness. And together with Yuval and Rakefat Kaminoach, who's the former CEO of Bank Leumi and Paper, which is the Israeli neobank, and Ronen Assia, who's the co-founder of eToro, we all joined forces with Team8 to build Team8 Fintech.
Excellent. And it was good to hear a background from both of you, from impressive career paths you both have done in the past, and obviously at present with Team8. And the way you describe how Team8 has grown in terms of diversifying its sectors, it kind of describes the Israeli tech space. I mean, can you give us a bit more background on the Israeli tech space and specifically around what's going on in the fintech ecosystem?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay,
So I think Israel is probably most known as a startup nation. Unbelievable number of startups, and every second person is an entrepreneur in Israel. So just to share the numbers, about over 6,000 startups are actually in Israel today, over a variety of different sectors. Obviously, cyber is something that Israelis are very known for, but also agriculture tech and health tech and biotech, and of course, fintech as well. I think there are a couple of components that impact Israelis' ability to drive innovation. One is the army. A lot of the young people in Israel go through the army and get training in a lot of unique technologies, which are very paramount and important in driving cyber innovation and data innovation, which we also see actually fueling a lot of the fintech innovation. And I think in addition to that, there are also a lot of actually multinational companies that have acquired companies in Israel, and through that have established their R&D centers. So they're also training a lot of young Israelis in the tech space and kind of fueling this innovation. And I think if you look at the evolution of the tech scene in Israel, a few years ago, the emphasis was really around building companies that turn to exits pretty early on. And today the industry in Israel has matured a bit, and you see more big companies like Payoneer, that Yuval was modest, but is a fintech unicorn and a very, very successful company, like eToro of our partner Ronen, but many other companies in the fintech space and outside of the fintech space that have grown to be companies that focus on scale and fuel that innovation. I think in the fintech space, you can see fantastic companies that have come out of the Israeli market, adding to the companies that I've mentioned, Riskified in the fraud prevention space, and Lemonade in the insurtech space. So I think the combination of the army training, the intelligence unit of the Israeli army that is very strong in training Israelis, together with the multinationals and the big tech unicorns that are in Israel, are really driving a lot of innovation in Israel.
Thank you for that. My next question is for Yuval. So this month we're celebrating our theme on artificial intelligence. And can you give us a bit of background on artificial intelligence in Israel, and how has that played a key part in the growth of fintech specifically?
So I think by now, AI or machine learning, whatever the time is already, it's not really an innovation anymore. It's part of almost any technology company by now. It doesn't matter. I mean, Payoneer, we use it for know your customers and a lot of fraud tools. I think you mentioned Riskified. So Riskified is a great machine learning tool to identify fraud. I think PayPal is probably using many tools. So I think by now machine learning is just part of any technology company. I think that, and this is the space that we're really excited about. I think that there's a perfect storm coming in, or I guess all the star align in combining the science of data. So there's a lot improvement in data, combining this with machine learning, understanding payment, which went through a lot of transformation recently, and credit. Those are each of these spaces are really complicated by itself, but the combination can really transform some of the financial industries, especially banking and payment. So I would say to your question is that by now it's I think the machine learning itself is I wouldn't call it a commodity, but it's given. Combined with the rest of it is a really unique cocktail component that can bring many beautiful things to the market.
Excellent.
I hope that.
It does, and I think we see that across the world too. It's not just
Yeah.
really. I think
Yeah, I think, and I would say when you ask about Israel, I don't know that Israel is unique in all. I would say if you look at fintech in specific, it's not geographically colored. So it's not like, you have, in Italy, you have the designer and they're going to influence each other. So the Italian design, or you have German-made engines.
Yeah.
So I think fintech is very global. I think there's something about Israel that is by definition needs to go outside of Israel because it's too small to be interesting. So what you have, and maybe that's something to add to what Galia mentioned, is you have a critical mass of people who've been trained in fintech.
Mhm.
And that's important, right? Because there's no school for fintech. You either work for PayPal and you kind of study your way into it, or you work for a bank and you try to figure this out somehow. But there's no way to really understand it, and it's changing too quickly to be able to formalize it. So I think what you have here is in the domestic areas, you have enough people that have been in either companies that are big enough, or companies that failed, or companies that were successful, and they bring with them the, I guess, just learning by practice, and that gives a lot of I guess human wisdom that can together build companies. Okay.
Excellent. I think you're absolutely right with that. It's a very good point of view. And you
Thank
were
you.
mentioning earlier, Galia, which brings me to my next question, is obviously with Team8, you've started doing work around fintech. In terms of what you guys have been doing that you're able to talk about, can you give us a bit of enlighten us in a way in terms of what has Team8 been doing specifically that has kind of encompassed the wider fintech ecosystem?
Right. Yeah, sure. So again, I think we're relatively new to the game, so everything is pretty early on. I think for Team8 as a group, as a whole, we have some activity around investment in fintech companies, and we've already done some investments there. And I think for the company building practice, and it correlates very well with what Yuval actually stressed right now. We're really seeing the power that data can play within fintech innovation, and then can be taken to many different aspects and many different fields. You can see clearly, for instance, in the payment world, how data can help reduce decline and increase authorization and drive efficiency and drive risk assessment in a more sophisticated manner. So I think this is a very interesting space for us that we're really focusing on. And through our activity, we're already looking and exploring a first intersection, which is really credit and leveraging access to data and data technologies to kind of bring credit capabilities and risk assessment when it comes to credit to the next generation. So we're currently focusing on trying to build risk assessment capabilities around credit risk for e-commerce sellers. That's a specific intersection that we're looking into. Believing that today, again, through access to data, every company that is making their data available through APIs, scraping technologies, and of course, machine learning and AI that's allowing us to drive prediction on top of that data that we now have. We believe that we can take all of that, access full digital footprint, and factor that in to risk assessment. So this is one space that we're obviously looking into and potentially building our first company around that.
I can give you two examples just kind of to make the story more interesting, right? So if you look at someone who sell online, right? So there's a few things. First of all, he's international by definition. You sell online, you sell on Amazon, you sell on eBay, you sell on Wix, you sell on Shopify. You sell online, you're international. Someone may take care of the logistics for you, but you sell online. You sell internationally. Now, what if we find out that a seller bought the product at a much higher price than other stores, right? So obviously, he's less credit worthy, right? And sometimes you can find this information by multiple sources, right? You don't know exactly what the purchase was, but you can figure out based on multiple elements. And you can have indication that this guy didn't really do a very good deal. So now that's like a pretty strong indication. That's one element. But it's not the data about the price because you don't have it. It's the implicit data that you can find out about them. And that's pretty big deal. It's also a big deal because you don't need to have a very intrusive due diligence to find this out. You can actually find a lot without even interfering. So the the reason that you approach a store is you know about the store much more before you even reach out. So you don't waste time on store that you then later don't qualify. So that's kind of one example. There's also, I think, if you look, there's an interesting element, right? If you look at the possible risk of a store who sells online, so one of the biggest risk is that Amazon will shut them down. And Amazon have this engine that walks around and find and look for all kind of violation. And if he finds something that smells like a violation, he would turn off a page or a product or a whole store.
Yeah.
And now you're stuck with inventory. And if it's the wrong timing, it's a loss. It's a loss of momentum. It's a loss of grade where you actually sell the product. It's a loss of cost of storage and logistics. And I mean, this is a pretty big deal. So if you can predict which of the stores are violating the rules and you can see what's going to happen soon, then it's a new risk that didn't never existed before. Like it's a machine that turn off companies and changes the probability of default. So that's just two of many, many ideas that, with wisdom you can figure out and then predict the credit.
So
Excellent. Thank you
I
for
think,
sorry, go ahead.
yeah, no, so sorry, just to add to that. So I think this clearly demonstrates how data can be impactful. Data technologies and predictions can be very impactful in fintech, as one example. And I think part of what we try to do at Team8 and kind of our methodology and the way we choose to tackle opportunities is really through very deep research of where are the problems and where are the opportunity space. We do this combining our domain expertise, but also through speaking with the market. And we really try to validate obsessively before we even start a company. And that ties back to kind of the de-risking element that Yuval was mentioning earlier, that the space is interesting, that the solution that we want to bring to tackle this space is actually relevant, and that we have customers for such a solution from the get-go. Yeah.
Excellent. And to finalize everything here, my last question is, I'm speaking to you guys from Dubai, and I think Yuval, you said this for the first time. This is also my first Zoom call from Dubai to Tel Aviv, so this is also new for me as well. Being Dubai, my base at the moment. So my last question is for those who are new to doing business with Israelis, whether across the world, what kind of piece of advice would you give people that are watching this in terms of doing business with Israelis?
There's something beautiful about fintech in general, and I think cross-border, and I think it applies for Israelis. But the language is business model. It's the business is unit economics. The business is very, the business of fintech is a very international, cross culture, cross border, cross everything. So in many ways, it's so I would say first is if you speak the professional language, if you speak to the merits of the issue, you will find Israel to be very, very easy place to work and very welcoming and very right. So like I think the sensitive point would be around humor, around being direct, around being not politically correct sometimes, or whatever the culture misunderstandings. But to do the business, to actually do business, I think by now, because of so many years of high tech and working with so many countries, there is some kind of a fairly smooth interface, and people appreciate the different holidays in China, and people appreciate we have in Pioneer we open offices in Philippines, so there's a lot of interface with Philippines. So I think you have a pretty international educated group of how to interface with different cultures. So most likely it's going to be a very fun and um, straightforward transition. There's also the element, and we use it back in the days before the COVID, And we tried to convince, and it was easy, and people really like to come to Israel. There's something very powerful about, it's a small country, but it's very powerful to kind of sense the energy and the tempo and the excitement and the speed of which things happens. And so I think in many cases, even at Pioneer, when we had offices worldwide, the biggest event was to bring everybody to Israel. Everybody loved to come to Israel, not to London, not to Spain, not to France. When there's something about coming to Israel or doing parties in the desert was just exciting. So overall, it's a very straightforward, pleasant, direct place to work with. Galia, do you agree?
No, I think you said it right. I would just add to that when you're interacting with Israelis, don't be shy to be direct.
Yeah.
We're very straight to the point. I think that Israel holds, I think, great opportunities. There's massive talent. Israelis are relatively early adopters of new technologies, and there's always this interest to drive new innovation. So I think joining forces with the tech power of Israel can be very impactful in driving innovation.
Excellent. So to sum it up, over 6,000 tech companies, a thriving entrepreneurial spirit, and directness. So thank you guys so much. And it's obviously Team8. So thank you both. Thank you again, Yuval. Thank you again, Galia.
Thank you for listening. Thank you for taking the time to.
No, definitely. And hope to see you guys in Dubai and vice versa.
We will.
See you there.
Would love to.
Thank you.
Excellent.